Oh, thank you for the wonderful introduction, Maggie. You make me sound far superior to what I actually am. So I very much appreciate that. And I'm just thankful to be here. It sounds like I'm following a tough act. Flossie sounds like someone who we should connect with because military spouses is a demographic that we serve. So I'm just grateful to be here and happy to share what Code Platoon is doing.
Awesome. Well, we'll absolutely have to facilitate, an introduction between you and Flossie because yes, military spouses have a lot on their plates. And if you want to support veterans, you have to support the military spouses as well. So I think that is very, very advantageous for both of you. Okay, so to start us off, tell us a little bit about Code Platoon. What is the mission? What should people know about it?
Yeah, so at its most basic level, Code Platoon exists to help veterans learn how to become software engineers. That's the bottom line, 5-second version of what we do. A little bit longer version of that is that Rod Levy, the executive director, started Code Platoon. I think we're going on year 9 now, if I'm not mistaken. He started it after a long career in finance, and his desire was to help the veteran population, but not just help them in the sense of designing a nonprofit that helps, but rather to give hard skills, and that these skills were very employable, that were eminently employable. And teaching software engineering via the method of immersion, a boot camp model in coding, was his solution to that problem. Coding boot camps had already been on the scene for a few years, and he saw that as a viable way to approach the problem of circumventing college maybe right away to start your career sooner. As many can attest, you get out of the military and you say, well, I don't know what I want to do. Maybe I'll go to college for 4 years. This is an immersive, few months long project that within 3.5 to 6 months, like that kind of time span, can launch a career going from the military to now I'm 80, 85, $90,000 a year within just a very short period of time with some hard in-demand skills. It is a true nonprofit. And when I say true nonprofit, what I mean by that is I've been involved in the veteran space since 2009, and I've seen organizations that claim to be nonprofit. It's a sketchy term, right? This is a true nonprofit, and I've been impressed with it. It's one of the reasons I've been here for 5 years. I've stayed with the organization because it truly does put every dollar it possibly can towards the student, towards the veteran group that they are serving rather than itself. So one of the ways that we do that just up front, we make sure that tuition is not a barrier to attendance. And I mean that when I say it. We have scholarships that range between 80 and 100% of the tuition covered. We have multiple access through the VA. That's somewhat changing based on things like vet tech, and we can get into that if we need to. But we make sure that we are in compliance with VA, with DoD SkillBridge, in order to offer up as many avenues as possible for each and every veteran demographic, to include spouses and now to include children also of military families. So we are the only coding boot camp in the country that only serves that demographic. That's kind of the short, that's the short version.
Yeah. No, I mean, this sounds really wonderful and kind of reminds me, so my husband was in aviation in the Army. And so when he left the military, he had a ton of skills that, yes, were very applicable to a real world position, but that's not the case for everyone. And like you're saying, one of the major perks of enlistment is, a GI Bill so that you can go to college, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you leave the military either prepared for what civilian life is actually going to be like, or with any idea of what you actually want to study. So even if maybe coding doesn't turn out to be the thing you want, at least you're learning that lesson a little more quickly than investing in a 4-year degree somewhere, only to realize, I don't actually want to be an accountant. I'm terrible with net numbers or whatever. So
That's absolutely correct. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So y'all offer full stack software engineering courses at a fraction of the cost of traditional boot camps. Like, this is massive. How are you able to keep the programs affordable while you're still providing a quality education?
Good question. That's a great question, first of all. Second, that's one of the primary focuses of our organization. So our organization exists, first of all, to launch careers in tech. And I say that specifically in this context because compared to a university's goal is not necessarily to start your career. A university's goal is to give you an education. I'm not saying that's bad. Obviously, I have a heap of student loans to prove, that I did it. And, I saw value in that. But the ultimate goal of a university is not to launch your career. That is our ultimate goal. And so our skill set that we provide is geared towards that. Now, the reason I say that in this context is we partner with companies that know that. So the companies we partner with, something companies like Motorola Solutions, 8th Flight, Travelers Insurance has now hired several of our graduates, Accenture, a lot of these very big companies, DRW, they know what we're doing is eminently practical. They see the value in that, and so they're employing our graduates. But part of that goes along with fundraising for a nonprofit. And we do extensive work in the neighborhood of grants and fundraising in order to help students who don't have GI Bill or for whom GI Bill is no longer applicable. Maybe they've used it all. Maybe they can't come in person. Maybe, any number of factors. A spouse who didn't have the GI Bill transferred to them, they don't have that option of a GI Bill. So we have scholarships specifically designed for people who don't have access to that. And we do extensive fundraising specifically for that goal. So we do fundraising, and I was just in Chicago a month ago. I guess it was in September, so it was a little over a month ago, to do exactly this. We have an annual event where people from JP Morgan Chase, from Travelers, from Motorola Solutions, these companies all come to this event in order to fundraise. And we're doing it all year long through grant applications and things like that. So we have a whole arm of our company that is devoted to raising money specifically for the purpose of reducing the cost to attend Code Platoon. I
love that. I absolutely love that, because you're right. It's, if the cost is what the barrier is and the cause is so important, I very much appreciate that is a focus for y'all, because it's something that is easy to potentially lose sight of. Yes. In pursuit of the mission of like, well, we can help people. It's like, but how could you help more people? So I like that. Right. I like that a lot. And I should add in light of that too, what you just said, I've been here almost 5 years. January will be 5 years for me at Code Platoon. I've never seen a student not attend because of tuition. There's been a number of reasons why people don't attend. Maybe they just decide this is not for them. They don't want to be a software engineer. Totally fair. Maybe they have other things come up in life. They can't attend. Whatever reason, I've never seen tuition be that barrier. We've never let it happen. So somebody comes to us and says, I am dead broke, but I've got the skills, and they demonstrate those skills, we will make it work. On the tuition side of things, we'll make it work. I love that. Love. Okay. All right, let's talk success stories. I'm always really eager to hear some of the standout outcomes from Code Platoon graduates. What are there any that spring to mind as like, oh yeah, you have to hear this person's story? Oh, there's too many. I mean, there really are too many. And that, as I mentioned, I was just in Chicago. It's amazing the number of graduates who come to this event to share their stories, right? I don't know of any other organization where people willingly and voluntarily show up for that specific reason. They're not paid to show up. We feed them, give them drinks, but other than that, we're not paying them. And they show up to share their stories. We've got our instructor who evaluates all of our applications was a former infantryman like me, got a master's degree in education and was teaching, but was just he'll tell you, he's just kind of lost. Like he just didn't, it didn't fit in where he was. And he submitted an application to Code Platoon. He now works for Amazon Web Services, and he's our pre-work instructor. So here he is and he's just over the moon with this. And then we've got, I think what's interesting is that we've got this diversity of success stories. So we've got someone like him, Guillermo, who came from that world, but then we have a disproportionate number of military band people. Why military band? Like music people. Okay, so you're in the military band, you're serving in, say, the Air Force band or the Army band or the Navy band. What are you going to do when you get out of the military? Yeah. You talk about skills that don't transfer. Yeah, that's a skill they learned before the military, and then they built it in the military. But unless you're going to work for an orchestra in a city, you're not going to do anything with that, right? You're kind of... And I love what you're saying right now, because think about it, right? We're talking about people that have spent either a term of service, so like 6-7 years, or people who have spent their entire career, we should say, in the military. It is it is absolutely unconscionable how quickly the shift moves, because 1 minute you're in the military, you know all these things, your skills are valid and worthwhile and celebrated and needed, and then you're not. And
And then it's not
just
there.
that quickly, it's all it is the setting, and all of a sudden those skills, they're not, it's not like they go away, but they're not monetizable by like for you anymore. So I think that it's a massive shift in mindset that I don't know what people outside of military families really understand, that it is massive, and you're dealing with, trying to make sure that people, like, they don't feel like they've wasted their career up to that point. You know what I mean? You have to try and make that a turn into a next step, as opposed to, well, now I have to start all over. Like, you are encountering people at a potentially very difficult moment of their lives, and that's important to be able to help them through that. That's massive.
It's absolutely correct. And I'm fortunate to be just a part of it. I'm kind of that first point of contact who does basically exactly what you're saying. The engineering part of it, the instruction on the hard skill, that's not me. So anyone who says, hey, coding is not for me, believe me, you're preaching to the choir, right? Because it's not for me either. That's why I'm a recruiter. But
Same.
I'm that person who can help bridge that gap and say, for the musician or the linguist who says, man, I don't know if this is for me. I can say, look, we've had numerous people from your exact background come and do exactly this and transition smoothly. And in fact, that's one of my ongoing efforts on, I've been putting out YouTube videos, interviewing our graduates and our alumni, but, based on what they did in the military, and say, how did you make this transition? So we've got all these stories. I just interviewed someone last week. We haven't posted it yet. It'll be a fascinating interview for anyone to watch. Her master's degree and her bachelor's degree was in animal behavior research. And she got into coding because she wanted to research how to track manatees. Like, she's doing this whole project with tracking manatees. Fascinating stuff, right? That I would never ever have encountered otherwise. And most people would think, well, that's not a smooth transition, but we're starting to see the need for technology in every aspect of life. These scientific endeavors that we need to track things. We need to know how to do that. We're providing the tools to do exactly that. Code Platoon, it basically operates as a foundational learning point, just like boot camp would for the military. You're not coming out of boot camp being an expert by any means in any aspect of military life, but you understand military life and you understand the fundamentals of whatever branch you join. A Marine who comes out of Marine Corps boot camp, they understand the fundamentals of being a Marine. Someone who comes out of Code Platoon understands the fundamentals of software engineering, software development, and can go into these different areas with relative ease, especially considering the short amount of time that they've spent on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, now we've talked about, we've mentioned your military service. Obviously, it's part of what brings you to this work. Now, as a former airborne infantryman, how did your military experience specifically shape your approach to working with veterans who are also trying to transition into a new career?
Sure. So I think my specific experience, given that I was first airborne infantry and then second a PSYOP team chief, although those are not particularly well-received skills in the civilian sector, it works fantastically for what I'm doing now, in that I can draw common themes and common ideas from people who come to me, even if they have a radically different background, right? So we have the individual who is our current program director is also an alumni. He was an Air Force F-16 mechanic, but he was on Eglin Air Force Base. I was stationed on Eglin Air Force Base at the Army Ranger Camp. So suddenly I have this common theme, and I can find these little common themes, and we can say, oh, I was here and I know exactly where you are. That resonates in a way that it simply would not at a university with someone who doesn't have that military experience. So I wouldn't say, necessarily being an airborne infantryman is the greatest recruiting tool, but just having that experience, and people can look at it and go, okay, you get it. Like, if anybody gets it, the guy who jumped out of planes and broke his hip, he probably gets it, right? And I did. Woo, raise my hand. Yeah, that's me.
Well, and that's the great like kind of equality within the armed services, right? Everybody goes through basic, everybody does this. And so you have that somewhat innate talking point, but at least it's I mean, it's basically like you're visiting the moon and you walk across somebody else who also speaks English, you're going to be like, oh yeah, let's talk because we speak the same language, literally. So
Right, right.
yeah, you have like, if you, even if you don't have a common background, like shared places and stuff, you have enough in the orbit in common that you can orient yourselves. That has to be, you know, very, very valuable within this field.
Absolutely, it is. Absolutely. And I wouldn't trade, you know, injuries aside, I would not trade my experience for the world for that reason, because we're able to have that common ground. Again, even if it's somebody from a different branch who did something a little bit different. You know, someone who's in the Navy who's stationed on a ship is about as different as it gets from what I did, but we can still look at each other and respect how we played a part in this bigger picture. And I think
Yeah.
that's huge because of what you mentioned earlier. And this is a problem that I've noticed in the veteran community in general. People get out, they make that switch, like you mentioned. There's that point where you're in and now you're not. Now what? You were part of an ongoing story that's bigger than yourself, right? That's
Yeah.
huge for people in ways they don't realize maybe until many years later. They're part of something much, much larger, a grander narrative. And now they're
Like a
simply
community.
not.
Yeah, there's a community involved in it, even if that's not how you see it.
Exactly, exactly. And Code Platoon offers kind of what I think is as a great bridge in that sense, because you're coming to a school, unlike a university, you're coming to a school that is solely people who understand that. That's it. That the only people who come to Code Platoon are of the military family. So you are going to go through something with people who are sitting there saying, yep, I got you. Like, I get it. You might have done something different, but I get it. And even for military spouses, everyone who's a student at Code Platoon, if they were in the military, they understand military spouses and they at least get it. So
Yeah.
nobody feels left out and isolated, as I did when I went to college, when I first got out of the military, and it was like, what am I doing? I left a Ranger battalion and immediately went to a college and a university, and it was, I had to really just kind of sit there and with my eyes peeled open and say, this is a very different world,
Oh
good or
yeah.
bad.
Well,
And
and
it
that's,
doesn't.
you're even thinking like exiting the military in a chosen manner, something you were looking forward to or something you had planned on. Like, I mean, that was not what happened with my husband, and I know how disorienting that was for him.
Sure.
Having to watch that was very painful as someone who grew up knowing and believing in the American ideals of, you know, we protect our veterans, we serve them because they
Right.
served us, and
Sure.
that was like eye-opening for me in a lot of ways. But you're making so many good points, because like even in the best case scenario, it can still be a very jarring transition. It can still,
Absolutely.
like, you know, pull the rug out from under you in ways that you really would not ever consider. Um,
Absolutely.
okay, so all right, so as we know that there's going to keep being a rise for you know, a demand for workers in the tech sphere. I'm loving your story about the woman with the manatees. That's the coolest thing I've ever heard. I was a manatee girl as a child, not a dolphin
Okay.
girl, so it touches me deeply. Um, but so obviously there's going to keep being this need. What do you think, like, what talents do you think that veterans specifically bring to the workforce that makes them particularly well suited for tech roles?
Sure. And that's a great question, because there's one area in particular that I've noticed, which is in the recruiting process. At some point, we have to let people know what Code Platoon, what the expectations are, right? So if you come to Code Platoon and you say, okay, this sounds interesting. What will I have to do once I enter this cohort? Well, at some point, we have to tell people this is 3.5 months, it's 15 weeks long, the immersive cohort of 10 to 12-hour days. Now, if you tell that to someone who has not been in the military, I think they're going to have a response that's like, what? And every single military person I tell that to, they go, okay, right? So that right there indicates what I see as a sharp difference in the ability to hear, I'm going to do something for 10 to 12-hour days, done that, right?
Yeah,
Just the
there's a
simple,
resilience there.
the internal resilience of saying, I can dedicate myself to something for 10 to 12-hour days for 15 weeks. I've done it before, right?
Depending on where you were in the military, you probably dedicated yourself to other things that you didn't necessarily find as stimulating for 10 to 12 hours,
Exactly.
because you're getting paid to do it and that's what you got to do. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
So yeah, I would say the resilience factor is the biggest thing that I've noticed. And then, every individual is a little bit different, but what skills they brought from their military, that varies, right? And we have to be appreciative of that, that again, the military band person, the linguist, and the special forces door kicker, these are vastly different realms in the military, but they all have this common theme of being able to dedicate themselves to a singular purpose. And I think that notion, the resilience to be able to do that, resilience is the best word, that you came up with there. That's the best explanation for that, to answer that question, that I see setting people apart from others who are not in the military. But again, that doesn't just apply to the veteran, it applies to the spouses as well. How are you more resilient? Well, if you've dealt with a long deployment and basically raising kids on your own, or any number
around, there's all kinds of stuff that, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And so having that ability to be able to dedicate yourself is huge, absolutely huge, because really, ultimately, that's what this is. It's dedication. Can you be dedicated to, I often use the example of languages. A lot of people go into software engineering and learning code and think that it's an engineering problem or a math problem. And they think, well, I wasn't good at math in school. Think about it like languages, because that's what you're learning. And if
I had that same thought when you were talking about the band members being like particularly good. Well,
yes,
obviously they already speak a second language because they know how to read music. Like,
exactly.
yeah, that's
Totally exactly
tracks.
my theory. Yeah. And if you can read music, then you have learned to read a code that translates into something else. Just like linguists do well in Code Platoon for the same reason. They've dedicated themselves to learning this foreign language. The difference with computer language is that you're not speaking it. You're never going to hear it. So it does require a little bit different mental processes, but it's still the same concept. You are dedicating yourself. So that, I think that resilience is exactly that's the short answer to that question that can be expounded upon infinitely, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left until we need to start wrapping up. So we've got a couple more questions we'll try and get through.
Yeah.
This one, okay, this one I think is most important to make sure we don't run out of time. For veterans or military families who are considering Code Platoon, what is the first step in the process, and what support is offered to them to help them succeed through that program?
Oh, good questions. And the answer is we make the application process very easy. And the application process itself helps you understand whether or not this is the right path for you. That application process includes me. I am here as a support person I talk with people one-on-one. We offer webinars of support, whether it's our finance enrollment guru, whether it's instructors reaching out to people to help them along the process. We are constantly there from the beginning to help you do so. You can do that. You can start this process one of a couple of different ways. We make it as varied as possible. First one, the most obvious one, is to email me, right? greg@codeplatoon.org. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And I can strike up a conversation with you and talk about your experience. We can talk about anything. And I'm happy to do that and walk through the steps. The second one is to simply go to our website and click on any button that says apply now. And you're going to be given a list of options. And what I would encourage people to do, if you're looking into this, there is no obligation at Code Platoon at any point until you are solidified and starting on day one of the actual cohort. What I mean by that in this context is that you can apply, you can go through all of the steps of the application, you can start learning the skills. So imagine you are applying to a language school and we start shoveling introduction to Spanish, introduction to Arabic lessons at you from the beginning. All of that, and I can't emphasize this enough, all of it is free. We're giving you everything we possibly can to get started learning on this process before you make any commitment whatsoever. So there is a tremendous amount of resources we can hand to you and walk through with you simply for free, simply by you signing up and saying, yeah, I'm going to give this a shot. So that's really all it takes, is to say, yeah, I'm curious. And that's what I encourage all the time. If you're curious at all, software engineering is one of the few skills in America today that you can start trying out immediately. I juxtapose that with, my wife's a nurse, right? My wife went through many years of schooling before you have to sit at a patient's bedside and get kicked and punched and vomited on and realize this is not at all what I learned in school. right? This is
Man,
not.
she's a nurse and a military spouse. Jeez. Woman loves to care for others.
Right.
Oh,
So, so most professions in America today are exactly that. You go through several years of college and you start doing it and you go, this is not really what I thought it would be at all. Software engineering is not that. You can start today, this afternoon, you can start learning JavaScript or Python free of charge. We're going to hand all that to you. And if you even slightly like it, guess what? That's what you're doing for a living. That is exactly the job. It's not going to be radically different. It's going to be deeper. You're going to be doing more with it, but it's not going to be radically different. You're sitting at a computer and deciphering code and interpreting and writing code. So we make it as easy as possible. We make the entry points as varied as possible. And we are here. We have several people along the way to help and are at the disposal of the students to go through the program.
awesome. Absolutely excellent. Okay, one last question from me. This one, apologies, kind of spitballing here.
No.
As you are, as you're thinking back over like what we've talked about, is there anything that you wish people would ask about this process? A question that never gets asked that you think should be on the table?
A question I think that I think lurks in people's minds that they don't vocalize until they let it build up is, can I really do this? We have in the tech world, and I'm going to explain that just a little bit because it might be a little bit vague. In the tech world, imposter syndrome is very common, right? And because people get into it and they think, they look at this stuff and you look at Python and JavaScript and you go, what is this? And I'm in over my head, right? That's a very common thing to think I'm simply way out of my depth. There's no question about it.
It's intangible. It's not like you can look at a filing cabinet and be like, okay, I understand how this all puts together. Like, yeah, I
Right.
get that totally.
Right. So we have a lot of people with this imposter syndrome concept. And I think that question, it does get asked, but almost in many cases too late, because people have built it up in their mind to be something more than it is. And so I want people to, that's one of the reasons my job exists. I want people to engage with me on exactly that topic, right? I want people to engage with me on this question of, can I do this? Is this realistic for me? Because one of the joys of my job is that back to that point I made earlier, Code Platoon being a true nonprofit, I'm not required to sell people on Code Platoon. What we do sells itself, right?
Yep.
If you want to become a software engineer, we can help you do that. I'm not here to like hammer you and say, you should do this, you should do this, you should do this. Not my job. And I'm not going to do that because there are a lot of people who say, this is not right for me. I had someone about 6 months ago call me and he was in the process and he called me and said, you know what? I can't imagine staring at a computer all day. I'm going to go be a truck driver. And I said, like, if I were in person with him, I would have high-fived him. I'd be like,
Yeah.
good for you. Great.
Know thyself. Yes.
You figured out what you don't want to do, which is a big part of learning about ourselves, learning what we can do, what we should do, all of these things, right? Yeah. But I want people to engage with exactly that type of conceptual thinking. Like, is this even right for me? Because we have so much to provide for people who ask that question, so many resources to help answer that in an honest, truthful, and non-pressured way. The pressure comes later. It's like boot camp. It's like the drill sergeants are going to put all the pressure on you that you need to make that decision to go into boot camp. We're not going to, I don't need to sell this. I'm not a recruiter in that sense. I'm a recruiter in the sense of helping people through the process. So
I'll help you through it, but you're not going to drag people to it. I like that.
Exactly. So just engaging with that question, is this right for me? And I'm going to help you walk through the steps with no pressure whatsoever.
I love it. All right. So if people want to reach out to you, you said Greg at codeplatoon.org.
That's correct. And codeplatoon.org is the website. We have plenty of venues to get in touch with us. If you also email info@codeplatoon, guess where it comes? This guy. So I'm happy to answer either way. Info@codeplatoon, Greg at codeplatoon. And there are many people who are at codeplatoon who are willing to help in a number of ways. So please don't hesitate to reach out, even if you're in the slightest bit curious about software engineering or tech in general as a career. Don't hesitate to reach out to me because, again, I can help you walk that path and figure out if it's right.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Greg. This was wonderful. I hope we get to do this again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for hosting and what you're doing and for having this. I appreciate it.
Happy to be here.